When I was growing up, when I was in high school, I was a student journalist. I was interested in TV production and speech and debate. And that interest really stemmed from my learning disabilities. I have dyslexia and ADD. And I was always, throughout middle school and elementary school, I was very insecure about my writing because it was so hard for me to learn how to spell. And it was so bad that even in my freshman year, when I eventually made it into my debate class, I had written on my debate folder, without realizing it, I had spelled debate wrong. That is how bad it was. And the reason why I got into speech and debate was because I wanted to show to my classmates that even though I couldn't spell or write very well, that I knew what I was talking about. I was a very petty teenager in middle school, as many people are. And I would get in small arguments with random people and back and forths, and I wanted to be able to roast my classmates. So I joined speech and debate. When I tried out, I thought it was going to be, we'd be debating different topics like, which is better, apples or oranges, or something like that. So you can imagine my surprise when I went out to try out for it, and I sit down, and the first question they ask me is, what's your opinion on the US's counterterrorism strategy in northern Iraq and Syria, and do you think it's working? I'm not kidding. I was 13. And I tried to give the best answer I could based off of the 60 Minutes and other news shows that I had watched in the previous weeks. And I failed because I mixed up Boko Haram with ISIS. Rookie mistake. And amazingly, they still let me in to speech and debate. And from that's when I started learning about things like gun control, the NRA, and I had to argue on both sides of these issues. I had to argue both for and against universal background checks. I had to argue both for and against GMOs and U.S. drone strike policy and all over the world and everything like that. And it was the most educational experience I had in my life. It changed my life. And I also was in TV production. And I always had a habit of being I was a bit of an angsty teenager, and I hated authority. I really hated politicians, especially, because I felt like they had failed my generation so many times because they were some combination of corrupt and stupid and, several other adjectives I can't say on stage. And as a result, I would go out there and I would try to make these different hit pieces about my principal. We wouldn't have enough Spanish textbooks, so I'd email the principal and say, hey, why don't we have enough Spanish textbooks? I want to interview about it. And then all of a sudden, we had Spanish textbooks, right? And from that, I really started to learn my own voice and gain a lot of confidence, and I wanted to be a broadcast journalist. And then one day, it was February at my high school, and it was a freezing day in Florida. It was about 70 degrees. So our door was open to our classroom because it was one of the few times of year it could be. And outside of our classroom, we hear a pop. My seatmate and I look at each other and we say, hey, we think that sounded like a gunshot. And we turn to the teacher and she, closes the door, but right as she does, the fire alarm goes off. And we start walking out to where we're supposed to evacuate to, but as we're doing that, there's a flood of students that come in the opposite direction of where we are, and all of a sudden, we end up running with them and getting into a completely different classroom where I'm with about 40 students locked in this classroom, and because I didn't know what to do, the only thing I could think of was to interview my classmates. Because I knew from my experience in TV production and speech and debate that school shootings in the United States had about a 1-week life cycle. And I wanted to make sure that if my classmates and I died in our classroom, that our voices, I interviewed them and I asked them what they thought about the NRA, what they thought about gun control, what they thought about what was happening to our country and that this was happening to kids in our country. Because I knew that the NRA's top strategy after every shooting was to say, you can't talk about this because you're politicizing tragedy. And I knew if the very kids who died in that shooting died saying that the adults, needed to do something, that it would be impossible for the NRA to refute that, or at least a lot harder. And luckily that day I made it out of my classroom with my classmates, but 17 of my other classmates in the building next door to us where the shooting we would come to find out had happened, did not make it out, along with their administrators. But today I'm not here to talk just about the shooting. I'm actually here to talk about something that keeps me up, at this point, even more than the shooting itself at night. And it's some of the conversations I've had over the past year going around the country with my organization, Leaders We Deserve. I'm working now to help elect the next generation of young people that marched with us in 2018, that walked out of their schools, to help bring them into office. And it's because I'm tired of hearing the same answers over and over again from Democrats and Republicans alike. In many state legislatures, you'd be surprised by the partisan leanings of some Democrats and some Republicans. Some are much more favorable and some are less. And I hear time and time again, you know, what happened in Parkland is terrible, but that type of thing just doesn't happen here. And then it does. I am tired of that. And I believe, you know, President Biden's generation, they didn't go through school shooter drills, but they did go through nuclear bomb drills. And that generation went on to pass some of the largest arms reduction treaties in human history, through START 1, START 2, and the New START treaties. I believe it's going to take bringing our generation into office now, as soon as possible, that understands the anxiety of what it's like to go through a school shooter drill, into office now, so that we're able to get this change. But what keeps me up far more than just gun violence are conversations that I've had going around the country, because I go and knock doors with our candidates. And there was an older woman that I met just last November. I was in Virginia. I was working on an election for one of the youngest people to run in that state since actually Thomas Jefferson, when he was elected when he was 26 to that state legislature. And I go up to this woman's house to knock on her door. She's about 75 years old. Her name's Helen. And I tell her that she's in one of the most important races in this state, that her voice really matters, right? And her response to me is, you know, I don't really care. My voice doesn't matter. All politicians corrupt, they all suck, nothing's ever gonna get better, and I'm just gonna die anyways, so why even bother, right? I know we hear a lot about how young people suck and don't vote in general, and how we're just disengaged and eating Tide Pods and things like that. But there's also a lot of older people who don't vote as well, that we also need to be talking about, right? But I've also had the same conversation just a week and a half ago in Texas when I was working on another campaign. I was going up to what was supposed to be about a 60-year-old woman's door named Lisa, and I knock on the door, and to my surprise, a shirtless 20-year-old with gaming headphones on opens up the door. And I explained to him, he didn't acknowledge that he was shirtless, it was kind of weird. I explained to him the election and the importance of voting, and he's like, that's awesome, the candidate supports abortion rights, they support gun control, they support all this. And he's like, that's great, I totally agree with that, but what corporations are funding her? And I got to say, because our candidates don't take corporate money, there actually are none that are funding her. Because as a Leaders We Deserve endorsed candidate, you can't take corporate money. And I got to see, thank you. And then he asked, he's like, well, who is funding her? And I said, I am, because we were our biggest contributor to her campaign. But I got to see his face shift from one of suspicion and distrust to one of excitement and inspiration. And what worries me is, when I was in high school, I was not too unlike that young man that I met in Texas, right? Who I got after that conversation, he actually did turn out and vote, and that candidate won by 74 votes. Becoming the youngest person in the Texas State Senate since Sam Houston, and the first openly LGBT person ever in that state senate as well. But, I understand the sense that his name was Kai, that young man that I was talking to. I understand what he was thinking, right? I have felt the same way through much of my life, especially before I got involved in politics. I truly saw both political parties as obviously differing on some policy issues, but largely the same, as both being corrupt and owned by the same corporations. And pretty much saw all politicians as sucking in general and never doing the right thing. And it's understandable that my generation, that I would feel this way, that my generation would feel this way. After all, we've been told that the best thing our government, the most powerful one ever to exist in human history, all it can do to stop a school shooting is teach you how to run, hide, and fight. Because our politicians would rather put our teachers on the front lines instead of having the courage to stand up to the NRA. And what worries me is that we've raised a generation that has been told their entire lives that that is all their government can do for them, to keep them safe in the one place of all that they should be kept safe the most, school. If they grew up in that reality, they're going to continue buying into the self-fulfilling prophecy that I know millions of Americans have, which is that nothing is ever going to get better because all of our politicians suck, everything sucks, and you might as well not even vote, you might as well not even bother trying because your voice doesn't matter and nothing's ever going to get better. The problem is that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Thankfully, we do not live under a dictatorship currently. But what worries me is that those young people and that older person and everyone in between that has that same mindset, they want one person. They're a prime target for an authoritarian. That's what keeps me up at night. Because so many Americans have lost faith that their government can represent them or do the right thing. And I'm here to tell you there is no one coming to save us. There's no single person coming to save us, because the day that there is one good politician, I know there's an itch that many people have. They just want one good person to come along and fix the system, weed out all the corrupt politicians, and do the right thing that isn't owned by anybody. Stop me if this sounds familiar. That isn't owned by anybody and just represents the people and doesn't take BS from anyone. The problem is, for you to get 100% of what you want in politics, you need 100% of the power. That is not possible in democracy. For us to fix this, for us to make school shootings history and not headlines, for us to actually make a government by and for the people to represent us, it's going to require us remembering that we are not going to be saved by any one person, that we, as the American people, have to save us. Because that is the only way that we are going to get ourselves out of this mess, and it's not going to be in one election. It may not even be in 2 or 3. It's going to take a lifetime, but luckily young Americans today have the greatest advantage you can have on your side in politics, which is time, and the fact that we're going to outlive a lot of those who doubt us. So, the work that I'm doing now is I'm working to show young people in every state that I can around the country that while they think the system's corrupt, while it sucks, while they think that everything is broken, they can at least see one person like that candidate that we just elected in Texas and know that maybe not all hope is lost, because there is one person who represents me. But there isn't one person who's going to save me, because there are hundreds around the country who don't take corporate money, who do the right thing and are there to fight for me. Thank you so much.